Anyway. Hello, my name is Tucker. I just realized that most of this video is filmed from below, so constantly look like I am doing a double shin, so that's gonna be fun to watch. I also want to note that I'm talking about adult romance within this video, not talking about YA or other age groups. And today I want to talk about the problems in the romance genre. I love the romance genre. I've been reading romance books pretty much obsessively for the past year now, but there are definitely a few problems with it, and I've noticed these problems more and more, and they need to be recognized, so today I wanted to recognize them. So around September of 2019, I decided to do a little experiment, and I borrowed a bunch of books from my library with the steamiest, smuttiest covers I could find, so like shirtless guys and girls kissing guys, stuff like that. And I was like, I want to read these books and see what I think about them, and I read about 3, and I was like, not my favorite. There was one, in particular that was along the lines of BDSM, and I was like, I don't like this. I don't like that this guy's kind of treating her like an object, and I was like, I get that some people are into this stuff, but it's not my favorite, so in my head, I was just like, I guess the romance genre isn't for me. But then I started reading some more books that were more about plot and characters, but also had sex scenes in them. So I was able to appreciate that part of romance a little more. So by, I would say, November of 2019-ish, I was really able to appreciate the romance genre for all of its perks. And I fell in love with reading romance books very quickly. I loved the feeling of seeing two characters fall in love. I loved the comedy, I loved the steamy scenes, I loved the happily ever afters. They just were really heartwarming. But then, I would say a month or two ago, I almost had an awakening of sorts. I started to realize that romance books were kind of making me have unrealistic expectations for relationships, mostly romantic ones. I'm not in a romantic relationship right now. Future ideas of relationships, and I realized I was constantly daydreaming about this perfect guy that I would fall in love with, and I realized this is unrealistic. This isn't necessarily healthy because I'm not going to find a guy who is physically perfect and constantly woos over me and that I'll never get into fights with, stuff like that. And so as I thought about that, number one, I had to kind of let go of those unrealistic hopes for a romantic relationship. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have, I suppose, expectations for I'm not saying you shouldn't have expectations for relationships and that you shouldn't have standards. You should. But I also would say that observe what you're hoping for and make sure it's not completely unrealistic. It's okay to have expectations, but you don't want to turn down every single guy or girl simply because they don't meet your idea of a perfect partner. But that was the first thing that I realized was the problem with the romance genre, is it was setting me up to fail in a way because I had unrealistic expectations. So yeah, that's basically the first problem, is unrealistic expectations. And I'm not saying this is a problem for everyone. It actually is probably mostly a problem for single people or younger readers like me. I'm 15, almost 16, so I still have a developing brain, and I'm still kind of naive. So that might just be a problem for that problem number one, which is unrealistic expectations. It's probably just for people who are still kind of impressionable, but it's definitely something that needs to be recognized. Not necessarily a problem or an issue that needs to be changed, just something that should definitely be recognized. So the next problem is physical body. So romance novels have done a lot in the past years to have more realistic bodies for female characters. We have plus size romances, full body, we've had more disability representation in romance, which is amazing. But the same can't be said for male characters. Now, I do want to note that romance is mainly read by women, so I can understand why the diversity of male bodies may not seem as much of a pressing issue. That said, there are male romance readers like me, and even in general, male characters need to have more realistic bodies. Even though there are diverse physically diverse female characters in romance novels nowadays, the male characters remain to be slim, muscular, which is obviously not the only body type. As someone who is not muscular, who will probably never be muscular like the male characters in romance novels, I would want to see someone who's physically more like me, and I want to see more physical diversity for male characters in romance novels. Another problem with romance novels is it's sort of a problem, but I sort of understand, and that is the realisticness of the story. Now, I do want to note that this is fiction. It's not meant to be 100% realistic. And I'm not asking for all romance novels to be realistic and, like, true to life. But I do wish there were more romance novels that didn't have that perfect, bubbly, happily ever after, because that's not real life. In most romance novels, there is the build-up, then there's the big misunderstanding, then the grand gesture, and then the characters live happily ever after. But in real life, that's not how it goes. So I do wish there were more romance novels with a bit more conflict, if that makes sense. I also wish there were more romance novels with married couples, rather than a guy and a girl, usually a guy and a girl, sometimes a guy and a guy, or a girl and a girl. Um, there are a lot of romance novels about people falling in love, but I wish there were more romance novels about them fighting to stay in love. Because I don't know who said this, but it's easy to fall in love, it's a lot harder to stay in love, and that's really true. I would love to see more romance novels of already married couples kind of fighting for their love and doing things to spice up their marriage. Examples of this would be Last Couple Standing by Matthew Normon, or The Bromance Book Club by Lyssa K. Adams. I wish there were more romance novels like this. Finally, I want to end on the sex scenes. Sex scenes are one of my favorite parts of romance novels, but they're kind of unrealistic. What is portrayed in most romance novels as sex isn't usually how it goes. That said, most romance novels have a kind of idealized version of sex. From what I've read online, from what I've heard from other people, sex isn't that perfect. It's messy, it's bumpy, there are mistakes, and I wish that was shown more in romance novels, because as I mentioned earlier, romance novels can set up unrealistic expectations, partly for relationships, but also for sex, and I just wish it was a little more chaotic, a little more messy, if that makes sense. So overall, I really do enjoy the romance genre, even if my complaints and criticisms made it seem like I don't. I do. They lift me up, they make me laugh, and I really do enjoy romance novels. I just wanted to point out the issues with them to make people who read them aware and kind of be on the lookout for this. I also would hope that maybe romance authors would see this and take these criticisms to heart. But yeah, I really do love the romance genre. It has its issues, but I really do enjoy it. So before I go, I wanted to share some books that either don't have these issues or kind of tackle these issues that I talked about. The first one is The Bromance Book Club by Lyssa K. Adams. This one, it does have the trope of happily ever after, along with the muscular man stuff. But what I liked is that it tackles the idea that marriage has problems, but those problems can be fixed. It also talks about honesty in relationships and doing your best to spice up relationships, which I really enjoyed. So although it has its unrealistic parts, it's so sweet and really pure. Well, not that pure. There's quite a few sex scenes, but it's really good. Also, it's about baseball players reading romance novels to better understand their wives, which is just amazing. So I highly recommend it. The next book I'd like to recommend is Last Couple Standing by Matthew Normon. This book is about a couple who decide that they want to try something else, that they might be having problems in their marriage, or that they're worried problems might arise. So they say, what would happen if we had sex with other people? Just platonic sex, just sex and that's it. And then they see how that affects their marriage. I like this book because it goes into the idea of what happens when you feel attracted to other people but you're married, what happens when your marriage seems to be losing its spark, how do you get that spark back, stuff like that. It's really creative, it's funny, and I really enjoyed it, so I highly recommend it. This next book is 1 Minute Leader by Susan Lewis. This one, don't let its thrillery cover get you a little confused. It is a romance. It's a contemporary romance with an aspect of literary fiction. I loved this one. It made me laugh, but it also made me sob. I won't spoil why, but it's so good. It goes into the idea of couples where one of them has a disability. How do you have a thriving relationship when you have chronic disabilities? And it also talks about honesty and how well do you really know your family and family dynamics. It was so good. I loved the mystery aspect woven into the story. I loved the relationship between the two main characters, and I loved the ending. I won't spoil it, but it was really good, but also really sad. Anyway, highly recommend this one. Finally, I want to talk about You Were There Too by Colleen Oakley. This book is about a girl who starts having dreams about another guy, and she is married. This book goes into how do you deal with the what ifs, what happens when, once again, when you see someone you're attracted to and you're married, how do you choose to either stay committed in your marriage or choose someone else. It's really sweet. It's also really sad. It made me laugh and cry, a lot of crying, and I loved the themes it had. It talks about miscarriage, how that affects relationships, how that affects mental illness, and all of that. I absolutely adore this one. It was one of my favorites of 2020, and I highly recommend it. Anyway, that was the video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that some of my points hit home. Let me know your thoughts on this. Let me know if you disagree or agree with any of my points, and thank you so much for watching. Bye. I'm filming outside today because it's really nice, but my neighbors are outside too, so hopefully they won't be concerned that I'm talking to my phone. Anyway, Unrealistic and oh my gosh, there's a spider on my leg. Ow! That was a bad idea. Anyway, so the next book